The wars with the Indians in northwestern America, on the shores of the Pacific Ocean, are but little celebrated in history, and probably but little would be known of the numerous tribes in that quarter, were it not that the spirit of trade penetrates to every part of the globe where a commodity exchange is to be found. The spoils, however, of these wars are before our eyes. They are suspended in Regent Street and Oxford Street, they adorn the winter robes of our ladies of fashion. The Indian furrier chief is far from civilization and holds his hunting grounds partly by force and partly by barter. He selects his spot, fortifies himself and surrounds himself with tame Indians and a half-race of Canadian trappers. These fight with the Indians who quarrel with him and trade with those who covet rum and tobacco. But the trader in furs has still more formidable enemies than the ferocious savages. A few leagues distant from him is the agent of a rival company who holds a kind of court, as he himself does, enticing the Indians to his market, offering higher prices, and not unfrequently, when art and stratagem fail to obtain him a preference, he sallies forth to exterminate his opponent. Such are the wars of the Hudson Bay Company and that called the Northwest, between whom a bloody rivalry exists which in bitterness, activity, and perhaps in acts of courage, vie with any which have been carried on in Europe. The fur trader of the North American deserts and wilds has to contend with climate, want of food and other privations in solitude, together with an armed rival near him and the treacherous Indians around him. The agents of these companies remain for years in pathless and solitary places far from the habitation of any society but that of savages. These are their only neighbors, excepting their rivals in trade. The Indian character, in one respect, resembles that of the Spaniard. He never forgets an insult or a blow. If he receives the latter, the rankling of his soul allows him no peace until it is revenged. All the qualities of cunning, art and perseverance are brought into play for the attainment of that one object. The following account of the loss of a ship, and the murder of the crew, is highly illustrative of this spirit of revenge. In the year 1811, a vessel sailed from Columbia for the purpose of obtaining furs from the Indians, carrying out such articles of commerce as the Indians desire in exchange for their commodity of various skins, collected in their hunting wilds and pathless woods. This vessel belonged to a company, having on board, beside the captain, an agent to manage the trade and an interpreter to assist him in his conferences with the natives. The vessel, however, after she left Columbia was never afterwards heard of until within a few years since, when another voyager and trader was sent out by an opposition company. The interpreter on board the vessel lost was an Indian, a native of Gray's Harbor, and it was from him the history of what befell the vessel and crew was collected. A few days after she had sailed from Columbia, the vessel anchored near a considerable village called New Whitby, which is in the vicinity of Nootka. With the inhabitants of this place a smart trade was immediately opened. The agent and his men were so well received that they were induced to sleep 2 nights on shore. However, during the agent's absence from the ship, several of the natives went on board and carried furs for the captain to purchase. Unfortunately, the captain lacked all those qualities which so preeminently distinguished the celebrated circumnavigator, Cook. His manners were unbending and rough in the extreme, and consequently but ill-fitted to come into immediate contact with savages whose character, upon every occasion, should have entered into his consideration. One day, having caught a principal chief in a petty theft while on board the vessel, the captain struck him a blow. It appears that the chief immediately went on shore and got up a conspiracy with his fellow countrymen to cut off the vessel. This, however, came to the ears of the trusty interpreter, who forthwith made it known to the agent on shore, in consequence of which they immediately hastened aboard and conferred with the captain, warning him to be prepared against any attack. The latter roughly replied, he never could believe that a parcel of lazy, thieving Indians could have the courage to attack such a vessel as his. In the intermediate time the disappearance of the agent and the men who were with him on shore made the natives apprehensive that their scheme was discovered. They therefore, in order to lull all suspicion, visited the ship in small parties totally unarmed, thinking, without a doubt, to throw their intended victims off guard. The chief who had been struck and who was at the head of the conspiracy to obtain his revenge played the part of a dissembler and visited the ship in an apparently friendly manner, affecting to have forgotten the obnoxious and offensive blow. At length it was made known that the ship intended to leave Whitby. Very early on the morning previous to the day named for her departure, 2 large canoes, containing each about 20 men, came alongside bringing with them bundles of fur, apparently for exchange and trading. The sailors therefore unhesitatingly allowed them to come on deck. In a short time 2 other parties, equally strong in numbers, arrived in canoes carrying beaver, otter and other valuable skins. To none of these was any opposition made to their coming on board, although the captain had previously been put on his guard. The officer of the watch, however, seeing a great number of other canoes pushing off from the beach, became suspicious, and forthwith apprised the captain of what he thought were the intentions of the Indians. The agent, the captain and the interpreter, being now all upon deck, the latter remarked that they all wore short cloaks or mantles of skins, which by no means was a general usage among them, and, addressing the captain, he entreated that he would lose no time in clearing the ship of intruders. This additional caution was however lost on the confident and fearless man. He treated the idea of the Indians taking the ship with contempt, remarking, that with the arms they had on board they were a match for 3 times their number. By this time the sailors were all on deck, indiscriminately interspersed in disorder with the natives, and that in such a manner that the gangways were all so blocked up, that it was impossible for the men to perform their duty about the ship. The captain at length, seeing the inconvenience, thought proper to request they would retire, to which they paid no manner of attention. He then told them he was going to sea and had given orders for the men to weigh anchor, and that he hoped they would depart quietly, but if they refused he would use force. He had scarcely uttered this threat when at a signal given by the before-named chief a loud horrible yell was set up by all of the assembled savages, who, without parley, simultaneously commenced an attack upon the officers and crew, drawing their weapons, consisting of knives, bludgeons and short sabres, from under their cloaks where, until this moment, they had remained undiscovered. The captain, although on this occasion imprudent and incautious, was still a bold and resolute man, and probably, had he and the crew been properly armed, they would have beaten the natives hand to hand notwithstanding their superiority of numbers. The moment the attack commenced he took out his jackknife and defended himself with almost unparalleled resolution, quickly ripping up the bowels of 4 of the assailants and wounding many others. The savages that were nearest to him retired in dismay, leaving, for a moment, a space around him clear. He had made a desperate and destructive defense, when being himself wounded and exhausted from loss of blood, he for a second leaned to rest himself against the tiller wheel, grasping his knife and casting his eyes alternately at his enemies and the way to the cabin, towards which he had made many ineffectual attempts to approach through the throng of savages that were opposed to his passage. His mind was, perhaps, engaged at this instant in resolving upon another effort to reach a spot where he could furnish himself with arms, and where it is probable he thought alone he should be a match for the whole body of natives that besetting him with deadly and murderous views of revenge. At this juncture he received a blow from behind, on the back part of the head. It was given with a weapon called a banshee mangan, a kind of bludgeon having flat sides with blunt edges. It was a dreadful stroke, and it felled the captain to the deck. The death-dealing knife fell from his grasp, his muscles were unstrung, the savage butchers rushed upon his powerless body to use their knives in extinguishing any remains of life that might be left and then throwing the mangled corpse overboard. The agent was one of the first attacked. An Indian gave him a severe blow with his flat bludgeon which, however, only stunned him, whereupon he was seized by 5 or 6 others who threw him overboard into a canoe alongside. Whether he was intended for the canoe or the water is uncertain. He however quickly recovered himself and was allowed to remain there uninjured for some time, only to suffer a second death. The last time this ill-fated gentleman was seen his head was hanging over the side of a canoe, and 3 savages, armed with bludgeons, were battering out his brains. When the captain fell, the interpreter was close to him, on which he jumped overboard expecting to share the same fate, but being uninjured. From the water he was taken by some women into a canoe and covered up under some mats. While these events were occurring, the crew were vigorously maintaining a brave but unequal conflict with the savages for their lives. At length the boatswain and 2 others, having dealt death around them with handspikes which they had seized at the moment of attack and having no other means of defense, fought their way to the cabin, which they knew was well furnished with arms. After well securing the door, it is probable they found time to recruit their spirits with a dram, and prepare for the further work of death. The Indians, having seen and felt the courage and prowess of these men when armed only with handspikes, and being perfectly aware that they were now in a depot of firearms, became more cautious in their movements. They dreaded the effects of more deadly weapons in the hands of men who so well knew how to use them. The 3 men in the cabin were allowed a moment's time for reflection. They at once saw that of all the crew besides themselves were either dead or dying around them, that whatever numbers they might yet have strength to bring down, they must in the end, with 600 or 700 savages on the deck and as many more around the ship, be overpowered. The boatswain said, looking out at the cabin window and seeing the natives in their canoes upon the water, "There is no hope of escape. Opposition is useless, but we will have our revenge, and it shall be a terrible one." Immediately 2 of them set about laying a train of powder from the magazine into the cabin. While this dreadful preparation was in hand, the 3rd man addressed the savages from the cabin window. He told them they intended to sell their lives as dearly as possible and stated how many they thought, with the arms in their possession, they should be enabled to kill, offering, however, the alternative of their being allowed to depart unmolested, adding they would give up the ship without firing a shot if the ship's boat was brought to the window and all the canoes withdrew from her while they made their escape in the boat. After some little negotiation the pinnace was brought astern when the 3 remaining heroes of the devoted crew, after effecting their dreadful arrangements in the cabin, lowered themselves into the boat from the cabin window. Seeing, in accordance with the stipulated terms, that no obstacle was interposed to their departure from the vessel, they fired the fatal train and as speedily as possible pushed off towards the mouth of the harbour. Hundreds who were watching their movements now rushed on deck or towards the vessel eager to share the spoils of the prize, yelling shouts of victory, but short was the duration of their triumph. Just as they had burst open the cabin door, the explosion of the magazine took place and in an instant upwards of 300 savages were hurled into eternity while as many more were dreadfully mutilated. The interpreter, who had, at this crisis, reached the shore, stated that he saw fragments of the ship and parts of human bodies, such as heads, arms, legs, etc., which were thrown on the shore, besides other signs of this dreadful catastrophe, which floated in from the harbour for several days. The original intention of the conspirators was to have taken the agent sent out as prisoner, to have secured him and the vessel, and to have exacted a ransom for them, but subsequently the love of gain gave way to the desire for revenge. The first impression of the surviving savages was that the great Master of Life had sent forth the evil spirit from the waters to punish them for the ill treatment of the sailors. These superstitious fears, however, subsided towards night, and they then saw that the event was brought about by the 3 fugitives. A pursuit was determined on in the same spirit of revenge as that which had moved them in the first instance to murder the captain and crew. The 3 unfortunate men, after reaching, with great difficulty, a bay where they hoped to escape observation, landed and laid themselves down to sleep that they might, the next day, feel refreshed and the better to encounter new troubles. The Indians, however, ever expert at a trail, discovered their retreat, and while they lay exhausted and insensible to fear, these relentless savages beat their brains out, thus mingling their spirits with those of their companions who had but a few hours earlier shared a similar fate.